Hi there. Let's move on with Baron Trump's marvelous underground journey. There's only 2 chapters left. I'm going to finish this today because I want to know what happens. Let's jump over there. Okay, chapter 31. With every turn in the winding way that skirted the white shores of this wonderful stream, its swarms of light-emitting animals led in a new beauty, for as the day advanced, if I may so express it, they lifted their glowing bodies nearer and nearer to the surface until now the river shone like molten silver, and as the sheer rock walls of the opposite bank held it set in them vast slabs of mica, the effect was that of a gigantic natural mirror reflecting the glowing stream with startling fidelity, and threw the flood of soft light in dazzling shimmer against the fantastic portals of the white marble caverns on this side of the stream. It was a scene never to forget, and again I paused in silent wonder to feast my eyes upon some newly discovered beauty. Now, for the first, I noticed that every white marble basin of cove and inlet was filled with a different glow, according to the nature of the tiny phosphorescent animals which happened to fill its waters, one being a delicate pink, another a glorious red, a third a deep, rich purple, and the fourth a soft blue, the fifth a golden yellow, and so on, the charm of each tint being greatly enhanced by the snowy whiteness of these marble basins, through which long lines of curious fish, scaled in hues of polished gold and silver, swam slowly along, turning up their glorious sides to catch the full splendor of the light reflected from the mica mirrors. And now the chilly breath of King Gelidus' domain no longer filled the air. I stood in the tropics of the underworld, so to speak, and but one thing was lacking to make my enjoyment of this fairy region complete, and that was someone to share it with me. True, Bulger had an idea of its beauty, for he testified his happiness at being once more in a warm land by executing some mad capers for my amusement, and by scampering along the shore of the glowing river and barking at the stately fish as they slowly fanned the water with their many-colored fins. But I must admit that I longed for the Princess Schneebel to keep me company. But it was a rash wish, for the warm air would have thrown her into convulsions of fear, and she would have preferred to meet her death in the cool river, rather than attempt to breathe such fiery atmosphere. By this time I had advanced several miles along the white shores of the glowing stream, and feeling somewhat fatigued, I was about to sit down on the jutting edge of a natural bench of rock, which seemed almost placed on the river banks by human hands, for human forms to rest upon and watch the wonderful play of tints and hues in this wide sweeping inlet, when, to my amazement, I saw that a human creature was already sitting there. His eyes were fixed upon the water, and methought that his face, which was gentle and placid, wore a tired look. Certainly he was plunged into such deep meditation that he either took or feigned to take no notice of my approach. Bulger was inclined to dash forward and attract his attention by a string of ear-splitting barks, but I shook my head. This wanderer along the glowing stream of day wore rather a graceful cloak-like garment, woven of some substance that shimmered in the light, so I concluded that it must be mineral wool. His head was bare, and so were his legs to the knees, his feet being shod with white metal sandals tied on with what looked like leathern thongs. All in all, he had a friendly though somewhat peculiar look about him, and his attitude struck me as being that of a person either plunged into deep thought or possibly listening for some anxiously expected signal. At any rate, accustomed as I was to meet all sorts of people on my travels in the 4 corners of the globe, I determined to make bold enough interrupt the gentleman's meditations and wish him good morrow. Through the revolving door. Whom have I the pleasure of meeting in this beautiful section of the world within a world? The man looked at me in a dazed sort of way and replied, I really don't know, I'm happy to say. But, sir, thy name, I insisted. Forgot it years ago, was his remarkable answer. But surely, sir, I exclaimed rather testily, thou art not the sole inhabitant of this beautiful underworld, thou hast kinsman, wife, family. Aye, gentle stranger, he replied in slow and measured tones. There are people farther along the shore, and they are good, dear souls, although I have forgotten their names, and I have, too, a very faint recollection of 2 of those people are sons of mine. Stop, no, their names are gone from me, too. I forgot them the day my own name slipped from my mind. As he uttered these words, he threw his head back with a sudden jerk, and I heard a strange click inside of it, as if something had slipped from its place. And in that And in that instant, a mysterious expression used by that master of masters, Tom Thumb, flashed through my mind. Rattlebrains. Yes, that was it, and now I felt sure that I was standing in the presence of one of the curious folk inhabiting the world within a world, to whom Don Thumb had given the strange name of Rattlebrains, or Happy Forgetters. I was so delighted that I could barely keep myself from rushing up to this gentle-visaged and mild-mannered person, whose head had just given forth a sharp click, and grasping him by the hand, but I feared to shock him by such friendly greeting, and so I contented myself with crying out, "Sir, thou seest before thee none other than the famous traveller Baron Sebastian von Trump." But to my great amazement and greater chagrin, he simply turned his strange eyes with the faraway look upon me for an instant. Then he resumed his contemplation of the beautifully tinted sheet of water, as if I hadn't opened my mouth. It was the most extraordinary treatment that I had experienced since my descent into the underworld, and I was upon the point of resenting it, as became a true knight, and especially a von Trump, when Don Thumb's brief description of the Rattlebrains or Happy Forgetters flitted through my mind. Said he, "By the exercise of their strong wills, they have been busy for ages, striving to unload their brains of the to them now useless stock of knowledge accumulated by their ancestors, and the natural consequences has been that the brains of this curious folk who call themselves the Happy Forgetters, relieved of all labor and strain of thought, have absolutely shrunken rather than increased in size, so that with many of the Happy Forgetters their brains are like a shriveled kernel of the last year's nut, and give forth a sharp click when they move their heads suddenly with a jerk, as is often their wont, for they take great pride in proving to the listener that they deserve the name of Rattlebrain. Nor do I need remind thee, O reader," concluded Don Thumb in his celebrated work of World Within a World, "that the chiefest among the Happy Forgetters is a man whose head gives forth the loudest and sharpest click, for it is he who has forgotten most." You can have a faint idea, dear friends, of my delight at the prospect of spending some time among these curious people who look with absolute dread upon knowledge as as the one thing necessary to get rid of before happiness can enter the human heart. No joy can equal the Happy Forgetters when, upon clasping a friend's hand, he finds that he has forgotten his very name, and no day is well spent in this land as the close of which the inhabitant may not exclaim, "This clay I succeeded in forgetting something that I knew yesterday." What did that say? This clay I succeeded in forgetting something I knew yesterday. At last the Happy Forgetter rose from his seat and calmly walked away without so much as wishing me a good day, but I was resolved not to be so easily gotten rid of. So I called after him in a loud voice, and Bulger, following my example, raised a racket at his heels, whereupon he faced about and remarked, "Beg pardon, I had quite forgotten thee, I'm happy to say, and thy name too, I've forgotten that. Let me see, art thou a radiate?" One of the animals in the water. I was more than half inclined to lose my temper at this slur, classing me, a backboned animal, as a mere jellyfish, but under all the circumstances I thought it best to control myself, for I could well imagine that from the size of my head and the utter absence of all click inside of it, I was not destined to be a very welcome visitor among the Happy Forgetters, and therefore, swallowing my injured feelings, I made a very low bow and begged this curious gentleman to be kind enough to conduct me to his people, among whom I wished to abide for a few days. That was chapter 31. Let's go to chapter 32. This is the last chapter of the book. The Happy Forgetter pursued his way calmly along the winding path that skirted the glowing river, apparently, no doubt, really unconscious of the fact that Bulger and I were following close at his heels. After half an hour or so of this silent tramp, he suddenly came to a standstill, and with his placid countenance turned toward the light, seemed to be far away in thought for several moments. I hesitated to address him, but as there were no signs of his showing any disposition to come to himself, I made bold to ask him the cause of the delay. "I'm happy to say," he remarked, without so much as deigning to turn his head, "that I've forgotten which of these two roads lead to the homes of our people." Well, this was a pleasant outlook, to be sure, and I don't know what he would have done had not Bulger solved the difficulty for us by making a choice of one of the paths and dashing on ahead with a bark of encouragement for us to follow. When I assured the happy forgetter that he had need no fear as to the wisdom of the choice, he gave a start, almost horror at the information, for you must know, dear friends, that the happy forgetter has more dread of knowledge than we have of ignorance. To him it is the mother of all discontent, the source of all unhappiness, the cause of all dreadful ills that have come upon the world and the people in it. Wow. Caught up in the arms of the torrent. The world, said one of the happy forgetters to me sadly, was perfectly happy once. A man had no name for his brother, and yet he loved him even as the turtle dove loves his mate, although he has no names to call her by. But alas, one day this happiness came to an end, for a strange malady broke out among the people. They were seized with a wild desire to invent names for things, even many names for the same thing, and different ways of doing the same thing. The strange passion so grew upon them that they spent their lives in making them in every way possible harder to live. They built different roads to the same place. They made different clothes for different days and different dishes for different feasts. To each child they gave 2, 3, or even 4 different names, and different shoes were fashioned for different feet. And one family was no longer satisfied with one drinking gourd. Did they stop here? Nay, they now based themselves learning how to make different faces to different friends, covering a frown with a smile, and singing gay songs when their hearts were sad. In a few centuries, the brother could no longer read a brother's face. We missed something? I guess not. Seems like it started rather abruptly, huh? In a few centuries, a brother could no longer read a brother's face, and one half of the world went about wondering what the other half was thinking about. Hence arose misunderstandings, quarrels, feuds, warfare. Man was no longer content to dwell with his fellow man in the spacious caverns which kind nature had hollowed out for him, piercing the mountains with winding passages beside which his narrow streets dwindled to merest pathways. In the land of the happy forgetters, care never comes to trouble sleep, nor anxious thought to wear the dread mask of tomorrow. Happy the day on which the child of nature must exclaim, "Since morn I've forgotten something. I've unloaded my mind. It's one thought lighter than it was." He was the happiest of the happy forgetters, who could honestly say, "I know not thy name, nor whence thou wast born, nor where thou dwellest, nor who thy kinsmen are. I only know that thou art my brother, and that thou wilt not see me suffer if I should forget to eat, or perish, or thirst, or if I forget to drink, or if thou wilt bid me close my eyes if I should forget that I had lain down to sleep." Bulger and my arrivals in the land of the happy forgetters filled the hearts of these curious folk with secret dread. At sight of my large head, they all began to tremble like children in the dark, stricken with fear of bogey or goblin. With one voice, they refused to permit me to sojourn a single brief half-hour among them. But gradually the sudden terror passed off a bit, and after a council held by a few of the younger men, whose brains had completely filled their heads, it was determined that I might bide for another day in their land, but that then the revolving door should be opened, and Bulger and I should be thrust outside of their domain. From what Don Flem had written about the happy forgetters, I only knew too well that it would be useless for me to attempt to reverse this decree, so I held my peace, except to thank them for the great favor shown me. The daylight, if I may call it so, now began to wane, or rather the thousands of light-giving creatures swarming in the river now began to draw in their long tentacles, close their flower-like bodies, and sink slowly to the bottom of the stream. I was quite anxious to see whether the happy forgetters would make any attempt to light up their cavernous homes, or whether they would simply creep off to bed and sleep out the long hours of pitchy darkness. To my surprise, I now heard the clicking of flints on all sides, and in a moment or so 1,000 or more great candles made of mineral wax with asbestos wicks were lighted, and the great chambers of white marble were soon aglow with these soft, steady flames. The happy forgetters were strictly vegetable eaters, feeding upon the various fungus plants growing in these caverns in a great profusion, together with a very nutritious and pleasant-tasting jelly made from hardened gum of vegetable origin which abounded in the caverns of certain rocks. There was still another source of food, namely the nests of certain shellfish which they built against the face of the rock, just above the surface of the river. These dissolved in boiling water made an excellent broth, which very much like the soup of edible birds' nests. Edible birds' nests. The clothes worn by the happy figures were entirely woven from mineral wool, which in these caverns gave a long and strong fiber of astonishing softness. The Rattlebrains were tolerably good metal workers, too, but contented themselves with fashioning only such articles as were actually necessary for daily use. Their beds were stuffed with dried seaweed and lichens, and Bulger and I passed a very comfortable night. As I was forbidden to speak aloud, to ask questions, or to walk abroad unless in a company of one of the selectmen, I was not sorry when the moment came for the revolving door to be opened. The happy figures had been led to believe that Bulger and I were 1,000 times more dangerous than scaly monsters or black-winged vampires, and hence they held themselves aloof from us, the children hiding behind their mothers, and the mothers peering through a crack and crevice at us. The size of my head inspired them with a nameless dread, and even half a dozen of the younger and more courageous drew aside instinctively to let me pass. For the first time in my life, I was an object of horror to my fellow creatures. But I had no hard thoughts against them, timid children of nature that they were. To them, I was as terrible an object as a torch-armed demon of destruction would be to us, were he to loose one of our fair cities of the upper world. And now the guard of the happy forgetters had halted in front of what seemed to me to be a huge cask fashioned of solid marble, and set one half within a white wall of the cavern to which they had led me. But on second glance I saw that there was a row of square holes around its bulge, like those atop of a chasm. The happy forgetters now disappeared for a moment, and when they joined me again, each bore in hand a metal bar, the end of which was set in one of those holes, and then, at a signal from the leader of the huge half-circle of marble, began to turn noiselessly around, exactly like a capstan. As each man's lever came to the wall, he shifted it to the front again. Suddenly, to my amazement, I saw that a great marble cask was hollow, like a sentry box, and you may judge my feelings, dear friends, upon being politely requested to step inside. Did I refuse to obey? Not I. It would have been useless, for was not the whole tribe of Rattlebrains there to lay hands upon me and thrust me in? So, taking off my hat and making a low bow to the little group of happy forgetters, I stepped within the hollow cask, and Bulger did the same, but not with so good a grace as his master, for casting an angry glance at the inhospitable dwellers in these chambers of white marble, he growled and laid bare his teeth to show his contempt for them. Now the great marble cask began to revolve the other way, and in a moment it was back in place again. I have heard several sharp clicks as a number of huge spring latches had snapped into place, and then all was silent as a tomb. I had almost said as dark, too, but no, I could not say that, for I looked out into a low tunnel which ran past the niche in which Balder and I were standing, and to my more than wonder was dimly lighted. I stepped out onto it, and it was as round as a cannon bore, and just high enough for me to stand erect. And now I discovered whence the light proceeded. In the cracks and crevices of its walls grew vast masses of those delicate, light-giving fungus rootlets, the glow of which was so strong that I had no difficulty in reading the writing on my tablets. In fact, I stood there for several minutes making entries by the light of these bunches of glowing rootlets. Hurled out to the sunshine. Then the thought flashed through my mind, which way shall I turn, to the right or to the left? Bulger comprehended the cause of my vacillation and made haste to come to my rescue. After sniffing the air, first one direction and then in the other, he chose the right hand, and I followed without a thought of questioning his wisdom. Strange to say, he had not advanced more than a few hundred rods before I noticed that there was a strong current of air blowing through the tunnel in the direction Bulger had taken. Every moment it increased in violence, fairly lifting us from our feet and bearing us along through this narrow bore made by nature's own hands and lighted, too, by lamps of her own fashioning. The motion of the air through this vast pipe caused bursts of mighty tones as if pealed forth by some gigantic organ played by the giant hands. It was strange, but I felt no terror as I listened to this unearthly music, although its depth of tone jarred painfully upon my eardrums. But by the dim light of the luminous rootlets I could see Bulger just ahead of me, and I was content. No shiver of fear ran down my back or robbed my limbs of their full power to resist the ever-increasing pressure of the air. But as it grew stronger and stronger, half of my own accord and half because Bulger set the example, I broke into a run. Our pace once quickened, it was impossible for me to slow up again. On, in a mad race, my feet scarcely touching the bottom of the tunnel, I sped along while the great pipe through which I was borne on the very wings of the gale sent forth its deep and majestic appeal. There was something strange and strangely and mysteriously exciting in this race, and all that kept me from enjoying it to my full bent was the thought that a sudden increase in the violence of the blast might toss me violently on my face and possibly break an arm for me or injure me in some serious way. All at once the deep pealing forth of the organ-like tones ceased, and instead came the awful sound of rushing water. Before I had time to think, it was upon me, striking me like a terrific blow from some gigantic fist wearing a boxing glove. The next instant I was caught up like a cork on a mountain torrent, swayed from side to side, twisted, turned, sucked down, and cast up again, whirled over and over, tossed and tumbled, rolled along like a wheel, my arms and legs like the spokes. Wonderful to relate, I did not lose consciousness that this terrible current shot me like a stick timber through a flume, whither I knew not, only that the speed of the volume went on ever increasing until at last a tumultuous torrent filled the tunnel, and robbed me of light, of breath, of life, of everything, including my faithful and loving Bulger. How long it lasted, this fearful ride in the arms of these mad waters rushing as if for life or death through this narrow bore, I know not. I only know that my ears were suddenly assailed with a mighty whiz and rush of water through the nozzle of some gigantic hose, and that I was shot out into the glorious sunshine and into the grand free open air of the upper world, and sent flying up toward the dear blue sky with its flecks of fleecy cloudlets, and Bulger some 20 feet ahead of me, and that then, with a gracefully curved flight through the soft balmy air of harvest time, we were both gently dropped into a quiet little lake nestled at the foot of the hillside, yellow with ripened corn. In a moment or so we had swum ashore. Bulger wanted to halt and shake the water from his thick coat, but I couldn't wait for that. Wet as he was, I clasped him to my heart while he showered caresses on me. But not a word was said, not a sound was uttered. We were both of us too happy to speak. And if you have ever been in that state, dear friends, you know how it feels. I can't describe it to you. At this moment, some men and boys clad in the garb of the Russian peasant came racing across the fields to see what I was about. No doubt, for I had stripped off my heavy outside clothing and was spreading it out in the sun to dry. Upon the sight of these red-cheeked children of the upper world, I was so overcome with joy that for a minute or so I couldn't get a syllable across my lips. But making a great effort, I cried out, "Fathers, brothers, where am I? Speak, dear souls." "In northeastern Siberia, little soul," replied the eldest of the party, "not far from the banks of the Obi." "But whence comest thou?" "By St. Nicholas, I believe thou spit out of the spouting well. What thou art doing here alone?" I paid no attention to the question. I was thinking of something else more important to me, to wit, my splendid achievement, the marvelous underground journey I had just completed, fully 500 miles in length, passing completely under the Ural Mountains. After a short stay at the near village, I engaged the best guide that was to be had, and crossing the Urals by the pass in the most direct line, re-entered Russia and made haste to join the first government train on its way to St. Petersburg. Having dispatched an avant courier with letters to my beloved parents informing them of my good health and whereabouts, I passed several weeks very pleasantly in the Russian capital, and then by easy stages set out for home. The elder baron came as far as Riga to meet me, and brought me the best of news from the Castle Trump, that my dear mother was in perfect health, and that she and every man, woman, child in and about the castle were anxiously waiting to give me a real German welcome back home again. And my dear friends, mit herzlichen Grüßen, Bulger and I take our leave of you. So there you go. That's the end of the book. And we know what happened. Spit out into the sunshine. That was amazing. We finished that book, and it was like 22 videos or 23 videos. That's cool. Very cool. Great story. So the next book we'll be reading is also by Ingersoll Lockwood. It's titled 1900 or The Last President. This is a very controversial book. It's a short story, so it should only take a few videos to complete. It was written at the turn of the 19th century, from 1800 to 1900. And it got a lot of interesting talk and play in 2017 when it's a very controversial story. Very similar to stuff that's happening now. That's why people are going, wait a minute. It almost seems as if somebody has gone back in time or somebody has come forward in time. But we'll get into that and see what happens. Until next time, always keep reading. Thank you for taking this journey with me. If you missed any chapters, it's all in its own playlist, Baron Trump's Marvelous Underground Journey. Until next time, see ya.